Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and I am exceptionally excited to have a very good friend with me today. And he and I have traveled a lot of miles together, spent a lot of time together. We've shot a lot of guns together, and we have visioned together. My good friend Darryl Howard is with us today. He is a generational science researcher and consultant. He's been involved in the development of a lot of movies that have been very successful through Grizzly Adams Productions. And today he's here to talk to us about generational science, and in particular, how trends in our culture and in the world have a cycle that we need to pay attention to. Darryl, you're looking good, man. How are you?
Thanks, I'm doing great.
Is it hot in Texas?
You know, I looked at the temperature just a minute ago, and it is 72 and sunny. It's absolutely perfect.
Okay, well, we could see triple digits up here today.
Well, we had that a little while ago, so and we have the humidity down here.
Yeah.
I mean, in Dallas, it's Sandy's very happy with the humidity. I can do with the air conditioning.
Okay, that a boy. Hey, nice to see you, friend. First of all, for those who don't understand what generational science is, because you have tracked boomers, Generation X, millennials. Now you're starting to take a look at the new generation coming on called the Homeland generation. What are these? What are these?
Well, over the course of history, you see these types of generations emerge, and they all have similar archetypes. In fact, you mentioned earlier about the Bible. The research actually goes way back, and if you look at the Bible through a generational lens, you will see generational archetypes. The baby boomers, who are the prophet idealist archetype. They implement their values during their time. The Generation X, the lost generation. Back in the late 1800s, they were referred to as the lost generation. Today, the Generation X is born between, say, 1962 and 1982. Boomers would be born from 1943 to about 1961. According to the research that I use, different people use different timelines. The millennial generation, which is now coming into their 20s and 30s, they were born between 1982 and about 2005, probably about 2 years back of the crash. And I would say they are a very team-oriented. They're special, they're confident, they're very optimistic about the future. And this is very similar to the GI generation. And there was an uncanny synergy between my mother, who was a GI generation, and my daughter, who was a millennial, same archetype. And so now we're going to have more of a silent type generation, born probably starting in 2005. They'll be called, I've heard them called, the Homeland generation. And it's very interesting. The silent generation grew up during the Depression. And their objective was to keep their head down and not be noticed. And I thought recently about the Edward Snowden affair and everything that's going online, and we all seem to be tracked. And this generation may actually say, you know, we just want to keep our head down like the silent generation did. So the other thing that happens is there's an interlocking. A lot of businesses notice millennials. They're all targeting a different demographic group. Right. But the one thing that they forget is that there's an interlockingness to these generation and what we call the fourth turning cycles.
All right, now that's where I want to go, and I think this whole thing is so fascinating because you have, by the way, those who are watching and listening, Darryl actually has PowerPoint presentations in depth of these various generations, and that information can be used in a lot of ways. I look at it from several perspectives. One, the content that we develop here at the Dove, both radio and television? And also, are we communicating the gospel effectively to these various generations? Because you can't speak one message to all those generations and expect it to stick.
No, you have to realize your audience. And as a matter of fact, I think in today's workplace, this is one area that it can be useful in your listeners' lives. If you look at the workplace, and let's say that you're a Gen X manager, you were born between, say, 62 and 82, and you're in charge of all these millennials. The Gen Xers were very individualistic. They did things on their own. Just stay out of my way, I'll get it done. The Nike saying, just do it. Okay, that's very Gen X. But millennials are very team-oriented, and they do things together. They feel special. So the Gen X manager oftentimes doesn't understand why it is that the millennials are different. We never had it that way when I was a kid. We just did it on our own. We were latchkey kids. We knew how to do these things. So even in the workplace, understanding how the generations interact with each other can be of a huge value, especially when you have 4 generations in the workplace today. You've got some silent generation, you've got some boomers, you've got Gen Xers, you've got millennials, and they're all different. They're not the same.
Now
we have to understand that.
You've seen the effects of this, Darryl, in movie making, on how you relate content and movie making. Share a little bit with us.
Well, one of the movies that we won about 30 awards for was called Friends for Life, a Grizzly Adams production, and we used generational archetypes in that movie. The boomer retiring saves the community, and he rescues some wolf pups. And it carries on. He's got a Gen X son. He's got millennial grandchildren, and the other thing too was in that movie there was this sense of community that the lead person in the movie saves the community from some bad things that are happening, and really that's where we get to today in this sense of community. I heard one of your earlier guests talk about the fire in down in Prescott, and we come together during this particular time in the crisis period. There starts to coalesce.
Wow.
And so we're seeing that emerge in the marketplace, in movies. In fact, Spielberg is going to be, I think it was Spielberg, it was reported yesterday, is going to be doing a new Grapes of Wrath story.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
You know, that is so timely. I mean, that's where we're at. There's a line in Seabiscuit where everybody, the crash comes and David McCullough is talking about America took to the road in their automobiles. I mean, they packed up everything they owned. They sold what they couldn't fit in their car, and they made do. And they traveled to someplace new to find work, to go with family. And in America, in a lot of ways, that's where we're at today.
Now, your research also is now starting to show up in the way companies advertise. I find it very interesting. No longer are they just saying, here, buy it for $7.99. They're actually trying to wrap the message or the image of their product around a story.
Yeah. You know, everything in this crisis period becomes uncertain. We don't know who owns the mortgage to our house, whether our bank's going to be in business tomorrow, all these different things, whether we're going to have a job. And so we turn inward and we follow our gut. And in order to communicate the good stories and good brands, you have to talk to the heart and not the brain. The brain's very logical. we may buy emotionally and we justify it logically. But I put on my blog, DarrylHoward.com, I put on there this morning, there's a great ad by Chevy that came out yesterday. And my wife watched it, and she says, I want one. It was a Chevy Silverado truck. And so I put on my blog this morning, I said, the only question is what color. And so I talked to her this morning, and I put it on the blog, and I said, the only question was, and she says, I want a white one.
Wow.
She knew exactly what I was going to say. But we have to tell a story about somebody else, and you see, as the consumer, you see through the company's eyes that they get it. Procter and Gamble with their Thank You Moms commercials, very good, very well done. And we see that they understand moms. They don't tell us that we understand moms. We make their clothes whiter or brighter or whatever it is that they do. They don't tell us any of that. They just say, we get it. And that's how you
All right, let me take a quick break. Darryl Howard's with us today. DarrylHoward.com. You may want to check out his blog. A lot of this information we're sharing is right there on his blog, and he's a great resource for you, research and consultant. And we want to get into the fourth turning. What is that? Well, Darryl will explain it to us when we come back. Okay, we're back, and our special guest today is Darryl Howard. He's a generational science research and consultant, and works with movie companies and advertisers, and even consulting businesses on how to better target their audience, and works with us here at theDove. And I can tell you his research is fabulous, absolutely fabulous. We're talking about the different generations, but Darryl, I want to move into which probably will really be quite consuming for us, the whole thing called the pattern in history, or calling what they call turnings. And you and I, back and forth, chit-chat, we're in this fourth turning, but there's a first, second, and a third. So what is a turning in history?
Well, I'd compare it to spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And there seems to be this great cyclical cycle that you can trace back. The research goes back 500 years, but if you go back further than that, in the writings of Homer and back into the Bible, I mean, you see these patterns. And what happens is, for more recent patterns, first turning is a high. Things are going great. Compare it to 1946 to 1962. We were building things. America was rolling. We were on this big high. The second turnings are going into the summer. And we had this, the 60s, the 70s, early 80s, and the consciousness revolution. We see this back in history, the first Great Awakening, second Great Awakening, third Great Awakening. And these types of periods of time, each one's about 20 to 25 years, they all roll out in a similar manner. Then third turnings are an unraveling. Autumn, the leaves are falling off the trees. And Peggy Noonan, back in about October of 2005, had said, it feels like the wheels are off the trolley's off the track, and we're hurtling towards some unknown destination. And that was really from the mid-'80s, the '90s, and then into about 2005. That's really an emotion that we felt. And fourth turnings, usually there's some spark that starts an event. For us currently, that would be the financial crash of 2008 and the housing crash that went along with that. If we look back in history, we see the same thing again. We see in 1929, the stock market crash started the Great Depression. prior to that, you had the land debacle and crash down in Florida in 1927. You also had the flood of the Mississippi Delta. So these things, like not long ago we had Wilma, Katrina, and Rita.
Right.
These things seem to cycle at the same time, and so the fourth turning, the catalyst of the crash, it starts a new mood. And on my blog, I lay out the anatomy of a crisis, because all 6 crisis periods in the last 500 years have unfolded in the same manner. We have a catalyst that starts it, and then we start throwing things at it to try and fix it. In the headlines, you see healthcare, you see immigration, you see we're all trying to fix these problems, and nothing seems to stick. You know, we can't fix that one big problem, whatever that big problem is. And in the Great Depression, you saw the National Recovery Act, the CCC camps. I mean, FDR signed every bill that was put in front of him. Then comes a climax where we all start to come together towards some big cause, some big problem. In the case of Pearl Harbor, it brought us all together. And one of the things is that in fourth turnings, the same type of events happen in previous turnings, but in fourth turnings, we react differently. So when Pearl Harbor happened, we didn't just declare war on Japan. We declared war on Germany at the same time. And we all come together at that point to work on this one big problem. Then comes the resolution. The climax and the resolution I would compare to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the taking of Berlin. I mean, those things all happened within a very short period of time. Treaties were signed, borders were redefined, Berlin was split into East and West. And so during that period of time, we experienced different things. Then comes the first turning again, and spring comes. So currently, you know, we're going through this sense of, oh, you know, this is terrible. We can't find a job. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. But one of the upsides about the Depression was we regained a sense of community. And people come together in times of need. And so for your viewers, one of the things that I would recommend is that you understand that there's this sense of community and go with it. You know, the millennial generation is very upbeat and optimistic. They're looking towards the future. So we work with others. We try and mentor them. I mean, the purpose of my blog was I want to just share the information that I have. If somebody can use it, great. There's no charge for it. We've spent, you know, lots of time and lots of money on research and just put it out there. Let people use it. I mean, these are things that we can do as we have this come together moment in history. We can do for each other.
Well, you know, I see, boy, this is fascinating. By the way, on this anatomy of a crisis or a fourth turning, so where are we in kind of your thinking? Because going back and looking at the time periods of first, second, third, and fourth turning, they're about 20 years. Is that about right?
Right. Yeah.
So if you
each one's about.
Excuse me. If you likened it back to 08, so we got a ways to go.
Yeah. Yeah. This is not a 30-second drive-through at Burger King.
Yeah.
Okay. People have to understand this is the long view of history, and these things don't happen right away.
Right.
I mean, you know, if you were in 1936 1936, you would look back and you would say, 7 years ago, we had the crash. Today, we look back and 5 years ago, we had a crash. And there are outside factors. So we're probably, 5 years into the 20 to 25 year cycle.
Because where do you place 9/11 in this? Because after 9/11, there was a great sense of community and coming back together. Was that just kind of like an odd thing in a third turning? Because
I think there are sparks. There are sparks that try and ignite a fire, and that seemed to be one of those things. If you looked back in history, you would see a similar type of pattern. I would say World War I was 1917, and the crash was in 29, so there was a 12-year span.
Right.
So there are some patterns like that, but there's sparks that don't catch fire. In this case, it was Ben Bernanke and Paulson going to Congress and saying, if you don't pass this bill before Monday morning, you're not going to have an economy. I mean, these are the types of reactions that we have in that time. So it's a 4-part series. I think we're going into the second part, the regeneracy, and we start to throw things at it to try and make it happen, try and fix things. Oftentimes they mess it up. But we put up with that because, we don't have any better ideas. We're going to try anything that works.
The other thing that you're also mentioning here that's so clear is the sense of community, of coming together. In a fourth turning seems to me the golden opportunity for the church to really exercise its benevolence. I mean, this is the real golden opportunity for the church to pull the community together. I mean, really be the church in a community.
Well, and it can be too for not only the community, but for certain segments of the community. I mean, Gen Xers, for instance, they don't necessarily have family. They were latchkey kids. They don't have, what they'd call biological family. And so we come together, we do things together. Give millennials a purpose. Here's 3 projects that we want to complete. Millennials, give them a start, a finish, a gold star. They can put it on their community service bio. These are things that we've done for the community, and people look at that. And they're going to be looking at that as we get further into the crisis.
All right, let me take another break here. Darryl Howard's with us. We're talking about generational science and the turnings of history, and the fact that we are in a fourth turning not only in the United States, but I think throughout the world. And what can you do? What do you do? We'll talk to him about that when we come back. Okay, we're back with Darryl Howard, and he's a generational science research and consultant, and talking about some fascinating information about the cycles of history and how we can take note of some things that's happened in the past and learn from those experiences. And by the way, you may want to check out his blog, DarrylHoward.com. Everything we talk about there, he's made available free on his blog, and let me encourage you to use that blog as a resource, because there's some great things there, and he keeps it refreshed with all new materials, so check it out. Darryl, it's been said, when there's a crisis, whether it's an individual crisis or a national crisis, there's usually 3 stages we go through. Shock and awe, number 1. Mm-hmm. Number 2, anger and blame. We spent a lot of time there. In fact, most of us camp there. And then the third one is personal responsibility. Those are the 3 stages we cycle through. So it appears to me as that we're in fourth turning. We went through the shock and awe. We're in this anger and blame stage. It's the Democrats, it's the Republicans, it's this person, it's that person, it's this and that. But right. Now you begin to sense that's so overwhelming. What do I do as an individual to survive through this?
I had a person the other day, he's a millennial, and he was discouraged. He had to move back home. There were a whole series of things that had happened, and when I explained it to him, and I told him spring will follow winter, and he understood the anatomy of a crisis and the bullet points and how it lays out, he went, oh, okay, I'm okay with living at home for a bit. You know, in 2005, we predicted grandma would sleep on the couch. I mean, you know, these things happen, and all of a sudden, he took a deep breath and he said, it really gave me great comfort knowing that, okay, these things have happened before. We get through it. This is not the you know, the end all of everything I've been trying to do. And he became very positive again about it.
Wow.
So, you know, there are some things that we can do. You get to know your neighbors. You get to involved in your organizations that your community. You get involved in your church. You get closer to your non-biological family. In a crisis, we depend on each other because the government's not going to be there to help us. Okay. And we have to do for each other. We've seen this in many crises. Here in Texas, we've had a whole bunch of tornadoes. People came out of the woodwork to help. And so use your expertise to help others. Millennials are sharing tips about, you know, how they should do things, and they're very team oriented. So they share how do I find a good product X, Y, and Z. The other thing is be flexible. You may take a job, you know, an executive may take a job selling pizzas and delivering pizzas. Don't worry about it. Your executive skills at some point, they'll be required. In the meantime, be happy with where you're at. I mean, find solace in other areas. Don't worry. I mean, you know, find solace in your church, comfort in the Word. Be liquid. You know, this crisis is not over. Okay, a lot of people think, well, we had the crash, the this, the that, the housing bubble. I still expect problems from Europe. Herbert Hoover wrote about the Great Depression. He said it came in waves, and there were really about 5 waves. So that's the way. He said that we had the crash of '29 handled, and then came the crash in Europe, and we just couldn't take it. Mm-hmm. So don't think that we're out of the woods. You know, this is a long view of history. You'll have to do more with less, and that's okay. You know, you may depend on your neighbors for something. Hey, can I borrow this? Can I help you out with that? But don't stress about it. The other thing is these things, they've happened in the same manner over 500 years. So we've seen it before, and we get through it. And there are helpful tips to get through it. And spring will always follow winter. I mean, we see that, you know, probably more so the further north we get. You know, down here it's hot all the time. I mean, what do you say?
You know what's so interesting about, I'm seeing too, is people not only becoming more flexible and becoming more relaxed with the fact that they may be taking a lesser job. You do see this sense of community, but one thing is really apparent to me. I've even seen the wealthy begin to simplify and get rid of things. There seems to be a great simplification going on. Would you agree?
We want simple. In fact, in the Chevy commercial that I put up on my blog, it's very simple music. and we saw this in Allstate. Allstate did some ads called Back to Basics in 2008, 2009, I think it was. Very simple piano music, Hyundai Assurance, where they said, we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. If you lose your job, bring your car back. No foul on your credit. Bring it back within 12 months. We're all in this together. And so you start to see these simple things, especially in the marketplace. And life is far too complex. We want simple. I mean, that's what we want to see in. Just give me a simple solution to the problem.
All right, I only got a couple of minutes left. Let me ask you this: the country seems, Darryl, to be tremendously divided and polarized. Is that a typical response in a fourth turning, and will that begin to fade?
Yeah, when Chuck Sellier, the head of Grizzly Adams, who passed away in 2011, when we first laid this out, there was Strauss and Howe, in their book, The Fourth Turning, laid out a possibility of civil war. We discounted it. We said, that'll never happen. I don't think that we've seen the country as divided as we have since blue versus gray, red versus blue. I mean, the last three fourth turnings were World War II, the Civil War, and the Revolutionary War. And so now the blues are getting bluer and the reds are getting redder. Mm-hmm. And we see this pulling apart. I think at some point, either A, we come completely apart, or B, something so big happens that it brings us all back together. It's kind of like you were talking about 9/11, that there is this central point at which we all gather around and we say, we have to put aside our differences.
Yeah, I think that is a virtue in the American spirit and soul. I would expect that to surface sooner or later. Who knows what will cause that? But on the other hand, you go over to Egypt today and look what's happening there. I mean, they've given the president 48 hours to get out of town. That seems to be pretty tough.
Yeah, a friend of mine said recently that are some of the events happening similar to an American spring? I mean, you look at the Edward Snowden events,
right,
and you seem to have this polarization of those who think he's on one side and those who think he's on another, and we may be experiencing that spring.
Wow. Darryl, thank you, my friend. Let's stay in touch. Darryl Howard, check it out, his blog, darrylhoward.com. Everything we talked about there is there today, and we'll have you back often because I think this is fascinating information and, quite frankly, encouraging.
And thanks for the app, Perry. I can watch theDove anywhere now. I really appreciate that.
Okay. God bless you, pal. Best to Sandy, okay?
Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
We'll be right back.